pervade throughout
MD,
the organization. Otherwise, I'm
जिस
telling you, it has become very, very important function now.
जो उस जनरल मैनेजर से एमडी थोड़े नाराज होते थे ना, उसको कंप्लायंस का डिपार्टमेंट दे देते थे। अब ऐसा नहीं है।
और आज आप देखो कंप्लायंस ऑफिसर की गाइडलाइंस और आरबीआई की, हाउ मच इंपॉर्टेंस इज बीइंग अटैच्ड टू दैट.
The importance of robust compliance and effective risk management cannot be overstated. It is no longer just a regulatory requirement or ticking of check boxes, as we were just discussing before starting this webinar.
Of enhancing compliance culture and risk management in Indian banks is no longer confined to some kind of, taking regulatory check boxes or reactively responding to certain situations. To inculcate a compliance culture within the organization in whatever position or role that you are performing, that compliance and risk management gets adequate attention, so compliance, risk management are not two different subjects, but they are embedded into each other. That we will discuss. And that would itself clearly establish that compliance and risk management are intertwined so far as any banker is concerned. And so long as you are having a robust compliance function made in respect of these particular risks or in respect of general compliance function per se, legal, regulatory, statutory, internal guidelines at all times, then this will pervade throughout the organization. And you can feel that there is a compliance culture which is embedded into every business. Now, why it is important that so much of emphasis is being given on compliance culture? Now, you will appreciate what kind of risk would an organization be exposed to. A robust compliance culture will minimize the risk of scandals. Had there been compliance to the regulatory guidelines, had there been a robust compliance function, had there been that kind of compliance culture pervading within the organization, had there been no shortcuts to boost the profitability of the bank, just because there was no compliance culture within the organization, the true sense of the term, function was there, chief compliance officer, everybody is there. That was not pervading in the organization. That was not embedded in the business practices that were being resorted to by that organization. That is, I think, September 2020, Reserve Bank of India came out with guidelines about the role and appointment of chief compliance officer within the organization. A board approved policy, compliance policy, which will clearly spell out the compliance philosophy, expectations on compliance culture, absolute authority to call for information from any business vertical, and that authority would flow from the compliance policy to be approved by the board. Now, earlier, as during our informal discussions, Arvind was pointing out that somebody who was not performing well was given the compliance function. That is why this particular guidelines were issued in September 2020, and there was a mandate that within 6 months, everyone has to appoint a CCO on these guidelines. If you are having a CCO, that also has to go through this process. We will have to necessarily follow that particular culture within the organization, because otherwise it will not be possible. Now, let me tell you, earlier there used to be annual financial inspection. Supervisory process more robust for the purpose of ensuring compliance by the banks. It is a web-based end-to-end workflow application through which RBI shall now monitor compliance requirements in more focused manner. They will ensure that compliance culture is there in all regulated entities. It's not only banks, it includes NBFCs and other organizations also. If RBI at any point of time imposed a monetary policy within the on an organization, why? In order to communicate clearly to the banks that gone are the days when RBI would overlook any kind of non-compliance by the regulated entities. And any non-compliance to any of the guidelines, direction, master circulars issued by RBI, if not properly explained, look at some of the penalties that have been imposed. I'm not talking about cooperative banks. I'm talking about because of violation of opening of current accounts need for discipline. Those guidelines, there was a violation. There is a monetary penalty that was slapped on ICICI Bank. With the guidelines issued by RBI on automation of income recognition, asset classification, and preventing processes in the banks. These guidelines were issued, they failed to comply, there is a penalty. It can have on the operations of the bank just because they fail to comply with certain guidelines about, and it resulted in these kind of regulatory actions where regulatory compliance with RBI guidelines, SEBI guidelines, guidelines on combating of financing of terrorism, all these guidelines have to be meticulously followed. That would also enable the banks to build customer trust. When there is a compliance, when there are no these kind of issues that come in the public knowledge, what happens? And if their trust in the organization goes up, that we are dealing with a bank which is a compliant bank, which is a bank which manages its risk effectively. To ensure compliance for all regulatory guidelines, statutory guidelines, internal guidelines, CC has to monitor, CC has to report, CC has to tell what kind of compliance risks are likely to emerge, how we have to deal with that. That's the role of CC for employees to imbibe compliance culture within the organization. Just to test whether people have understood what are the guidelines, what are the new requirements, and whether they are trying to actually, if despite all the efforts put in by the organization, if things are not improving, then in that particular case, you will have to, but you have to communicate that there is not much tolerance, or rather zero tolerance within the organization for the compliance function. Now, as I was mentioning, whole plethora of guidelines are issued, be it on KYC, be it on AML, cyber security. Nowadays, data privacy, cyber security. If you look at those kind of issues because of digitization and digitalization program, how many new set of guidelines are coming? And this kind of, compliance monitoring, what is the kind of technology that we are deploying for the purpose of ensuring compliance? Data security has become, data privacy has become, all those guidelines have to be meticulously complied with. We are providing digital lending facilities to our customers. There are associated guidelines even on digital lending operation by Reserve Bank of India. What I am only trying to highlight is that every other day there is a new guideline that is being issued. One set of guidelines based upon customers' feedback, based upon other inspection feedback, based upon their analysis of the data received through Daksh portal. RBI is coming out with new set of guidelines every single day. Very rarely you will come across that these are effective from today itself, where they believe that it will take some time for the banks to prepare themselves to meet with these guidelines. Sufficient time is given. Sometimes guidelines will be issued in 25, effective from some month in 26. That time frame is given. But ultimately, within that time frame, we will have to prepare the organization. From the point of view of training and awareness, as also from the point of view of making necessary changes in the technology that has been employed by the bank to make sure that we comply with those set of guidelines within that specified timeline. There is SABI, every day we receive guidelines or direction, some kind of from DFS. There is a ease program of Government of India. We have to ensure compliance of that also. We are being, judged on various parameters under ease, which is now 8. I will briefly mention, I was just noting down one day as to what kind of guidelines have been issued by RBI, and I have not been able to capture all. So what I am trying to say in brief is that there would be these kind of, guidelines issued by Reserve Bank of India from time to time, and it will be incumbent on the part of all of us to ensure that we prepare our organizations to ensure compliance of the same, to match, customer expectations, to match regulatory expectations, to come to global standards, compliance regulations. So this kind of, issues, challenges are there. Regulatory guidelines that are coming on a daily basis. And then as I was highlighting few minutes before about digitalization, the kind of data explosion that has taken place and cyber threats that are emerging on day-to-day transactions. That is something, there are guidelines being issued, but are we able to, enforce, are we able to ensure compliance with all those guidelines? How to mitigate those risks? What are the kind of guidelines that have been put in place? That has to be aware. And ultimately, most challenging thing for me, if you have to bring about the compliance, is you have to create, as I mentioned, awareness, training, their strategic planning. Compliance has to be given very, very important place. There has to be that kind of approach when audit committee of the board meets, how much time it devotes on ensuring that compliance risk is minimized within the organization. He has to assess, identify, mitigate compliance risk. That is a very important role, which I have already shared with you. Come to know of non-adherence to certain guidelines at certain centers, protection being given to that particular person who has actually blown the whistle. If that is the kind of culture within the organization, it would definitely ensure better compliance. And then, now friends, let me now come to the associated topic, that is risk management. Risk management and compliance are two sides of the same coin. Let's not forget that risk and returns, banking risk is an integral part. Risk taking is an integral part of any banking organization. There cannot be risk-free environment in which we want to operate. Then hardly we will get, then we have to invest only in government securities. So we have to first think of risk, appetite, which is very important. Let's talk some of the risks that normally we talk about. That is about, first is about credit risk. What is that because risk is going to be there. We cannot dispense with the risk. Some of the guidelines that have been issued by Reserve Bank of India, we will talk about that risk. Are you aware that there are guidelines on single borrower exposure? You have to have prudential limits for taking risk on different industries. How much from time to time by Reserve Bank of India, in order to take care of that risk, you will be surely taking care of that particular risk. Now let's come to the another very important risk that is talked about is operational risk. This is a risk arising from inadequate processes, right, and inadequate policies, people failure, or external events. If we strictly follow all internal guidelines, processes, SOPs that are issued, or they have put adequate certificates, but we have failed to comply with those things, which typically means interest rate risk, equity risk, foreign exchange risk, in respect of credit risk, operational risk, market risk, naturally. And whole exercise of risk management is to identify, measure, monitor, and mitigate. So we are mitigating those risks. So automatically, through a compliance culture of adherence to all guidelines, we are mitigating those risks. That's the kind of thinking that I wanted to share. Now there is a liquidity risk. So you take any risk. I can go on giving examples of example after example. Reputational risk, I have discussed so much about reputational risk. If you take care of compliance, automatically to a great extent, you will be having robust risk management framework within the organization. But if you follow that potential guidelines or early warning signals, that particular risk would get mitigated if I follow the guidelines. I mean, I can go on giving examples after example as to how risk management and compliance cultures are intertwined, and you take any risk, whether it is credit, market. Yes, there are going to be credit risk management committee, there is going to be operational risk management committee, there is going to be a market risk management committee. All this in order to, manage the risk at the board level, at the bank level, all these risks separately. Sum and substance is that whatever are the residual risks, you also take into consideration that in order to provide for them. At the end of the day, the requirement is that all risks that are likely to impact your business operations by way of use of technology to take care of this particular compliance or risk of enhancing compliance culture and robust risk management practices. So I will stop here, and I would welcome any kind of questions, answers that you may have for me about compliance and risk management. Thank you so much to each one of you for your patient hearing.
And now we'll be moving on to our interactive part of the webinar. On 27th of September, which happens to be the fourth Saturday, we are having a session which I have called as Mentor Connect, your questions answered. So it's a session only, and our mentors will be there. All our mentors will be there in that session to answer your questions. But I'll request you to send your questions well in advance. We'll be receiving a lot many questions because already I have received many questions from the audience. But I'll be consolidating these and sending to mentors by, I think, 22nd of September. Release that webinar calendar also. Now over to our mentors first.
Guidelines or guidance what he has given. One is it should be nurtured as a culture of organization. Do have a responsibility that if you can nurture this kind of compliance. And second is it should be embedded in the decision making. And thus, I will say that the present generation of bankers is lucky that you have got all these guidelines on risk management and compliances, which can be really required compliances and the risk management practices in letter and spirit. It helps a lot. Why I'm saying this emphatically? Because while being the IBA chief executive, all these guidelines first come to the IBA.
In fact, that is the thing in the entire compliance and risk management area. There also the guidelines of Reserve Bank, but most of them are regulated entities and guidelines are very rigid.
And also aware of the consequences of non-compliance. Things will not happen. But should we continue with that philosophy of having compliance culture within the organization or not? My answer is emphatic yes. Why I talked about penalties. There was no need for me to do. But I wanted to highlight that there are consequences of non-compliance from DCC or projects to any kind of guidelines, whether same bank, lockers, this, that. But if we have to ensure compliance, there is a timeline given, as Tangsale was pointing out. It's not that suddenly out of blue, they get up and issue set of guidelines. It's a well thought out process. It is on the basis of lot of feedback, input that they get.
I
They don't
totally
need-
appreciate that part.
Yeah.
The cost of non-compliance is much more than cost of compliance these days.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for this thing, sir. What I am thinking in our bank, whatever, wherever bank, one person comes, he goes behind business. He does not understand much about compliance. And another person will go, he will do compliance. And this cycle, it goes on continuously. पहला वाले को दूसरे वाले बोलते रहेंगे or it goes on like this. This is what happening rightly, Abhi, just now you said. This is happening in the field. This is the main reason the person, even when I was working as branch head, my first priority was to do business only. Acha, second, whatever compliance, second line will see. But second line is not that much well versed or that much aware about the fact.
As to what could be the consequences of non-compliance. Why I'm saying that this has to be embedded into the business strategy. Otherwise, let me tell you, you will not be able to sustain your operations unless until every person embraces that corporate culture. You would have seen deliberately, I kept my talk entirely on compliance culture.
This compliance culture is still on the papers and looking on the front of corporate officer, administrative officers. When it comes to the development of business, it is totally ignored, more particularly at the branch level or regional level, because most of the business is being driven by the regional officers, and these are further bad consequences for the you as well as the branch. So still there is a need to emphasize for the real implementation of the compliance culture down the line, who is largely associated with the business development.
Communicating to the operational units, to the business units, that compliance is also equally important. I cannot agree more than that. I am absolutely. That is why I always say that there is a need for us, because I know that this compliance, we may talk about compliance culture. Compliance culture cannot happen unless until last employee in the organization believes that it is also his responsibility. CCO cannot ensure compliance in the organization. I can give it in writing without ensuring compliance, because the cost of non-compliance is going to be very, very heavy for the organization.
I would just like to add what Kalias have said. I totally agree with the bankers that this overemphasis of compliance, and there were so many learnings out of that. So basically, I will say that risk management and compliance is to take an informed decision and not for as a deterrent for taking decision.
Good afternoon to all mentors, and thank you, Kalia sir, for such an exemplary talk on compliance. So, how HR policy should implement this continuous learning parameter in the way of career progression, or to enhance to make people more aware about that those who those who put efforts and learn continuously, they should be having a privilege of getting promoted to higher skills, and those, because bank is a competitive industry, we need people who are learned, who have the continuous knowledge and all habit of learning among the officers at even at the down level, and that will sort out the issues that in branches we are not getting the second line officers to do compliance, and they are totally focused on orienting business.
Transfer, postings, promotion, sanctioning of leave. This is human resources management, right? Now, is the emphasis on human resources management? No. Now, if you are growing the organization, if you realize this importance, whatever existing training capacity you have, whether you need to upgrade that capacity building has to be integrated part of the thinking of the top management. So that is something. Now you see for yourself. I don't know which organization you belong, but emphasis is shifting from HRM more towards human resources development. So I know what kind of changes we have brought about. Entire learning and development policy has been revamped for that organization. All right. And we are creating, we are going in a very systematic manner about capacity building of the training infrastructure within the organization. We are creating centers of excellence.
Excellent, this thing,
My-
training
my-
and
my
development.
parent bank.
center
Whatever I
about
was
the-
telling you.
I will only like to add, all those who are into trainings or even senior level, educate people through proper case studies.
It is one of the methodologies, sir.
Ah.
Every training center are nowadays using case studies because that's the
Correct.
most effective way of learning.